Egypt holds its breath. The Nile wakes to land before the sun does. It slides through Egypt like a living promise, dark, patient, eternal, carrying silt and stories from the south to the waiting fields. Reeds whisper, oars dip and rise, temples catch the first light and throw it back at the sky in gold and stone. Priests murmur prayers older than memory itself. This is a country that measures time in dynasties and believes the gods still walk among men. Egypt is strong, Egypt is rich, and Egypt is dangerously exposed. A king is gone. Inside palace walls, cooled by night air, courtiers speak in careful half-phrases. Generals glance toward the horizon. The gods demand order, and order demands a pharaoh. But the one meant to wear the crown is still a child, too small for the weight of Upper and Lower Egypt, too young to command the river, the armies, the heavens. The throne does not wait for boys to grow up. Into this pause, this breath held too long, steps a woman. She moves through the temple courts with practiced ease, past columns carved with victories and gods, past reliefs that have never imagined her face among them. She knows the rituals. She knows the names of the gods and the politics of priests. She knows how fragile power becomes when it pretends to be temporary. Her name is Hatshepsut. She is supposed to stand behind the throne. She is supposed to keep it warm. She is supposed to give it back. But Egypt does not need a caretaker. Egypt needs a king. And Hatshepsut understands something few rulers ever do. Power is not seized in a single dramatic moment. It is assumed, worn daily, made inevitable. Soon, she will do the unthinkable. She will take the titles. She will wear the false beard. She will speak as Horus and rule as Pharaoh. Not in spite of being a woman, but because she knows exactly how the system works. Before history tries to erase her, before her name is chiseled from stone, before they pretend she never stood here at all. To understand how a woman ruled Egypt for 2 decades, peacefully, successfully, and so well that her successors tried to delete her, you have to begin here, at the river, at the throne, at the moment Egypt needed a king, and found one. Hatshepsut was born into a world where power wore a crown and divinity wore a name. She entered the house of the 18th dynasty, not as an accident of fate, but as a carefully counted blessing. Her father, Thutmose I, was a warrior king, one who had expanded Egypt's borders with force and held them with confidence. Her mother, Ahmose, carried royal blood so old it felt sacred. Together, they gave Hatshepsut something rare in Egypt, legitimacy from both sword and sanctuary. From the beginning, she was wrapped in ritual, not rocked to sleep by lullabies, but by prayers, not raised in nurseries, but in temple courtyards, where incense hung heavy and the walls whispered stories of gods who chose their rulers carefully. Priests watched her grow, scribes recorded her name. The divine machinery of Egypt noticed her early. She learned to walk beneath towering columns carved with victories that belonged to her ancestors. She learned the language of offerings and omens, the rhythm of festivals, the careful choreography between throne and temple. While other children learned obedience, Hatshepsut learned meaning, how symbols worked, how belief moved people, how the gods were spoken into power. And then there was the quiet truth no one said aloud. She was not supposed to rule. Daughters mattered in Egypt. Royal women mattered even more. They preserved bloodlines, sanctified kings, and kept the favor of the gods flowing smoothly from heaven to earth. But the throne itself? That was reserved for men, sons who would become Horus incarnate, living gods on the Nile. Hatshepsut understood this early. She saw how the court measured her, valuable, important, but not inevitable. She learned how praise could coexist with limitation, how reverence could still place a ceiling overhead. So she adapted. She watched her father rule and noticed how authority sounded before it was announced. She studied how priests spoke when they wanted something to become true. She learned that in Egypt, power was not only inherited, it was performed, repeated, carved into stone until the gods themselves nodded in agreement. If the throne would not imagine her, she would learn how to imagine herself into it. By the time she was grown, Hatshepsut was more than a royal daughter. She was a high priestess of Amun, a woman fluent in ceremony, law, and divine theatre, a figure already standing at the crossroads of godhood and governance. Egypt did not yet call her king, but it was already teaching her how to become one. Power moved closer when Hatshepsut married Thutmose II. He was king by lineage, not by force of personality. Where her father had ruled like a storm, Thutmose II ruled like a shadow, present, legitimate, but rarely commanding. And beside him stood Hatshepsut, titled Great Royal Wife, a position that sounded ceremonial until you understood how Egypt actually worked. She appeared in reliefs, she performed rituals, she spoke for the gods when her husband could not. The court saw it, the priesthood felt it. Egypt grew used to her presence at the center of things. This was not ambition yet, this was proximity, and proximity teaches you everything. Hatshepsut learned how decrees were softened before they were announced, how generals were managed, how priests were rewarded, how silence could signal more authority than a command. She watched her husband rule, and quietly absorbed the parts he struggled to carry. When Thutmose II fell ill, Egypt did not look to her in panic, it looked to her in relief. Then the king died. Not in battle, not in glory, just gone. The heir was a boy, Thutmose III, young enough to still need tutors, young enough to still believe the world was orderly. Egypt was not patient with childhood. The Nile did not wait, borders did not pause. The gods demanded continuity. A weak regency could fracture everything. So, Hatshepsut stepped forward, calm, legitimate, already familiar. She did not claim the throne, she claimed responsibility. Officially, she ruled for the boy king. She wore the titles of regent. She spoke in the language of stewardship. She assured the court that this was temporary, that Egypt was safe, that tradition would be respected. And Egypt exhaled. Under her hand, nothing collapsed. Taxes flowed, temples functioned, trade continued, the army obeyed, the regency worked. Too well. At some point, quietly, deliberately, Hatshepsut understood the truth. Egypt did not need her waiting, Egypt needed her ruling. The fiction of temporariness became dangerous. Regents could be challenged, regents could be replaced. Regents invited chaos the moment they looked uncertain. A king did not. So Hatshepsut crossed the line no woman had crossed before. She stopped pretending. The transformation was not sudden, it was ceremonial. Titles changed, language shifted, reliefs were redrawn. Hatshepsut took on the full 5 royal names of a pharaoh. She wore the false beard, not to disguise herself, but to speak in a visual language Egypt understood. This was not rebellion, it was fluency. She did not ask Egypt to accept something new, she framed herself as something ancient, ordained, inevitable, a king. To rule Egypt, you did not only need armies, you needed the gods. So Hatshepsut rewrote the story of her birth. Reliefs declared that Amun himself had chosen her mother, that her reign was divine intention, not political improvisation. Stone made it true. Temple walls told the story again and again until belief followed repetition. Priests nodded, the people accepted it. Egypt had always been ruled by gods in human form. Now, so was she. For nearly 2 decades, Egypt flourished. No civil war, no collapse, no famine. Trade expanded south and east. The famous expedition to Punt returned with incense, gold, animals, and prestige. Wealth flowed into temples, order held. Hatshepsut ruled without spectacle, and that, perhaps, was her greatest threat to history. She proved it could work. She built like someone who intended to be remembered. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri rose from the cliffs like architecture arguing with time itself, balanced, deliberate, monumental. Every column declared permanence, every relief told her story. She carved herself into Egypt, so they would never forget. Behind her, Thutmose III grew. He trained as a soldier, he learned patience, he waited. She did not destroy him, she did not exile him. She ruled with him, secure enough not to fear the future. That may have been her only mistake. When Hatshepsut died, Egypt did not fracture. That alone was proof of her success. The machinery kept running, the gods remained satisfied, the throne passed on. But memory is a battleground. Slowly, deliberately, her name was chiseled away. Statues smashed, reliefs altered, her reign folded into someone else's. It was not rage, it was correction, an attempt to seal the breach she had opened. If she could be forgotten, she could not be repeated. But stone remembers. Centuries later, archaeology peeled back the edits. Her temples spoke, her reign resurfaced. Her achievements stood untouched by time. You can erase a name, you cannot erase success. Picture her as she chose to be seen, standing, bearded, crowned, not pretending, not borrowing, ruling. Hatshepsut did not rule because she was allowed to. She ruled because Egypt needed a king, and she answered. Hatshepsut did not rule because she was allowed to. She ruled because Egypt needed a king, and she answered. If you felt the weight of the crown and the audacity of her defiance, don't let her story be buried again. History is full of women who ruled so well they terrified the future. Women who forced the world to rewrite its rules, then paid the price for proving it could be done. Subscribe as we continue to exhume the lives of the dark heroines. Next time, we leave the temples of Egypt and cross the sea to Renaissance Italy. We're meeting a woman who stared down popes, led armies, and ruled her city with steel in her spine and fire in her blood. Next time, Caterina Sforza, the Tigress of Forli. Stay dangerous, stay loud, and never let them hold the pen.